This is David Kurtz for TPM Media. We're joined by Paul Rieckhoff, who's the Executive Director of Iraq and Afghanistan's Veterans of America, a veterans group that Paul put together. What's been the reaction amongst people in your group to the new deployment that Obama's announced now, 17,000 additional troops to Afghanistan?
I think there's concern. Beyond the obvious impact on those troops and their families, let's call it 20, 30,000 that may be headed to Afghanistan in the next year or so. Folks are welcoming the relief to the operational tempo that may come if we draw down in Iraq. But I think what we're most concerned about is this focus on troop numbers as an antidote to the problems of violence and to counterinsurgency. Any of us who've been on the ground understand that troops are a component of an anti-insurgency campaign, of a counterinsurgency campaign. It can't be the silver bullet. And you saw this in Iraq. President Bush, Rumsfeld, a lot of other folks thought that if we got the right number of troops, that all of a sudden everybody would have a puppy and flowers would grow. And we saw that, if there was security gains that took place, and there were some that took place, it was because it was complemented by economic investment. It was complemented by political and diplomatic options. It was complemented by trying to involve allies and really investing in the Iraqi security forces. It's not just troop numbers.
So are you really concerned then that we don't have a strategy yet for Afghanistan?
We don't. I mean, the president has not released his Afghanistan plan. I think that's what they're focusing on now. They released their Iraq plan last Friday, and we're waiting to see the actual comprehensive strategy for what happens in Afghanistan. And, I've been critical of Speaker Pelosi and others who seem to throw numbers around. You'll see a lot of politicians throw numbers around because there's a political impact. She said, for example, she was on Rachel Maddow's show, and she said, 50,000 troops as a residual force or as a transitional force in Iraq was too high. She thought it should be something like 15 or 20. But she didn't justify 15 or 20 either. Now, I'm not saying the number 15 or 20 is right or wrong or 50 is right or wrong, but I think politicians sometimes throw these numbers around because they know there's a political impact. They know that the American people want to see a drawdown, and they know that 50,000 seems high, so maybe 20,000 seems better, but still no justification for 20,000 either. So I think my point is that we've got to be extremely clear in what these folks are tasked to do, how they're going to be complemented by all the other tools in our country's toolbox, and we need to manage the expectations of our military families and the American people. Let's tell them when they're coming home. I give Obama credit for saying, look, 2011 is our goal line. It's the first time the military and the American people have something to work toward, to work back from. I've been critical of the Bush administration because we didn't know what right looked like. We didn't know what our end state was going to be. We didn't even know how long he predicted it would take. We didn't know if we were talking about 5 years or 50 years. So as a military planner, it's very useful to know where the goal line is so you could start to backward plan and you can think about how to take care of those families, how many tanks you're going to need, how many people you need to recruit. All that can be backward planned from a deadline. And I think that's helpful in Iraq. And if we have that same kind of clarity in Afghanistan, I think it'll help galvanize the country in a way that hadn't happened in Iraq, and will help us organize resources accordingly. But we do need a real, robust national dialogue about Afghanistan. Afghanistan is not just Iraq Part 2. It's something much more complex. It's something very different that needs to have a different strategy and an entirely different national conversation.
So a mistake then to announce the additional, or to, not just to announce, but to plan the additional deployment there without first having this national discussion, this debate, and developing a national coherent strategy to how we address it?
I would have rather seen it. Yeah, I don't think you can just double down in Afghanistan and hope that the American public isn't watching or that they, imply their support. I think when you decide to double your combat forces in a foreign country, there should be a pretty robust national debate. I mean, unfortunately, the Iraq plan was rolled out on a Friday, the day after the budget was released. Now we're back to economic news. I mean, the Iraq withdrawal plan was off the news pages by Saturday. So as a defense guy, as a veterans guy, I'm continuing to try to refocus our country on our foreign policy challenges. It does have an impact on our economy. If you look at the VA budget alone, the VA budget for next year is going to be over $100 billion. I mean, that's a huge economic investment. So you can't necessarily separate our foreign policy and veterans care from the national discussion about economics, but we do want to try to continue to remind people you've got over 100,000 troops in Iraq, you've got about 30,000 troops in Afghanistan, you've got other forces around the world, and no matter how bad the economic situation gets, we've got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time.
Paul, always good visiting with you. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate it.
This is David Kurtz for TPM Media.